Hi, everyone, and thanks for joining us. My name is Katie Starr, and I am with the Standlee Premium Western Forage marketing team. Standlee Premium Western Forage is a family-owned business located in southern Idaho with ideal growing conditions to raise some of the best quality forage in the country. We're here to serve you and your animals with consistent, high-quality nutrition and valuable education to keep them happy and healthy. Welcome to our educational webinar titled Winter Feeding. Can I feed my easy keeper and hard keeper horses the same? During cold weather, the horse requires additional energy to maintain its internal body temperature and keep warm. The exact amount of energy depends on the severity and the extent of the cold period, as well as the body condition of the horse. Throughout this presentation, we will discuss the differences in feeding management strategies for easy keeper and hard keeper horses during the winter. If you happen to be new to joining our webinars, we'll take just a minute to go over a few items so you are comfortable with viewing and participating in our webinar. If you're viewing this as a recording, feel free to skip over this section. As a heads up, we will have a couple of poll questions throughout the webinar that we will pause the presentation for you to answer. We will also be giving away some free product coupons at the end of the webinar, so you'll want to stay with us till the end. We've taken a screenshot of an example of the attendee interface. You should see something that looks like this on your own computer desktop in the upper right corner. Clicking on the red box with the white arrow allows you to open and close the control panel anytime you'd like during the presentation. You're listening and using your computer speaker system by default. If you would prefer to join over the phone, just select telephone in the audio pane and the dial-in information will be displayed for you. You will also have an opportunity to submit questions via text to today's presenter by typing your questions into the questions pane of the control panel. Please feel free to send in your questions at any time during the presentation. We will collect these and address them during the Q&A session at the end of today's presentation. And depending on how many questions that come in, we may not be able to address all of them within our time frame, but we will definitely use them for future nutritional pieces and connect with you one-on-one if you reach out to us. We have also attached a nutritional paper associated with today's webinar, along with a body condition scoring chart that you can download from the control panel under handouts. For those of you viewing this as a recording, go to standleeforage.com under Nutrition and Nutritional Resources to find the handout titled Fight the Cold, Feeding During the Winter, and the Body Condition Scoring Chart. These are both great take-home pieces for this webinar. And that's all I have from an introductory standpoint. So please welcome Dr. Tania Cubitt with Performance Horse Nutrition, who serves as one of our Standlee Premium Western Forage equine nutritionists. She has a PhD in equine nutrition and reproduction. And with that, I will go ahead and let Dr. Cubitt share a little more about herself before she begins the presentation.
Thank you, Katie, and thank you everybody for joining in this evening. I know it doesn't seem like it's going to be winter soon, but it is right around the corner. And so I am always a proponent of being very proactive about feeding horses for different scenarios and getting ahead of the curve. And I think this is a perfect time to be talking about feeding horses in the winter time. And especially the question of, can you feed the easy keeper and the hard keeper the same in the wintertime? And we're going to get into that. So we're first of all going to start about digestive function, because I think it's really important that we understand how things are supposed to be digested so that we can understand how we're feeding them, why we're feeding them. We'll look at some of those energy requirements, and do those energy requirements change under certain temperature and climatic conditions. Look at fiber requirements, because remember, that's what the horse is designed to eat, is fiber. Water requirements, because it really doesn't matter if we're feeding him all the best fiber in the world. If he's not getting enough water, he will be dehydrated and we will have a disaster on our hands. So water is very, very important. Then look at those differences in nutrient intake between hard keepers and easy keepers. And then, as Katie said, we always love to leave enough time for questions. So we will take those questions in the end. So let's look at digestive function first. On the left-hand side of your screen, you can see the natural diet of the horse, and you can see that photograph on the bottom is a group of horses out in a field grazing and eating with their heads down, looking like they're eating a wide variety of different forages. This is very normal for wild horses. They're called trickle feeders because they literally have a small amount of nutrients constantly trickling through their digestive system. They move around, they're foragers, so they're eating different types of forbs and legumes and grasses, and they'll graze for around 15 hours out of the day. They'll eat off the ground, which increases natural drainage of the respiratory tract, increases chewing time, and maintains proper teeth alignment. Unfortunately, though, what we do is more consistent with the right-hand side of your slide, that picture with the horse in a stall, perhaps under lights to bring on fertility or reproduction in mares or shed out a hair coat. We feed them out of buckets at chest height. We also put cereal grain-based diets, very common in our horse population today because we want them to live longer and have do a lot of exercise and maintain body condition. They typically consume these feeds relatively quickly, and that changes the overall acidity of the GI tract. Some horses get frustrated due to being on their own, others don't really mind, but that feeding at chest height really alters the natural digestive process of the horse. So I think it's really important to remember that the horse's digestive system is, number one, designed to digest fiber. When you look at the diagrams of the digestive system, 65% of the equine digestive tract is 100% solely meant to digest fiber. That's the cecum, large colon, and small colon. So it's imperative that we feed them plenty of fiber. Other things that occur in the hindgut of the horse, for example, when we feed them plenty of fiber, the bacteria, when they're breaking down that fiber, they create heat. So it's twofold that they need plenty of fiber because they're grazing animals, but in the wintertime, that fiber will also create heat and keep them warm. Let's talk about what is happening in the wintertime. Well, typically in that cold weather, horses decrease their feed intake on cold and windy days because they're seeking shelter. When they're standing in the run-in shed, they're not actively out there grazing or foraging. If you have snow accumulation greater than 7 inches, that's really covering the grass, decreasing that intake of pasture, and that decreases actual grazing time, so time spent grazing, by about 24%, but it actually decreases their actual intake only by about 22%. But that's a quarter of the amount of forage that they would normally be consuming. They're not consuming now, so they're only really consuming 75% of their required daily forage. Pouring through that deep snow to get at the grass greatly increases their energy expenditure. When they're constantly working trying to pour away and access that grass, they're wasting energy that could be used to maintain body condition or maintain body temperature. In cold and windy conditions, the horse loses more body heat and therefore will burn more energy or calories to stay warm. You think about the primary way that a horse loses heat in the summertime, how they dissipate heat is out of their skin. It's when the cool breeze, they sweat and the cool breeze blows on their skin and they can lose body heat that way. While in the wintertime, if we've got a lot of cold conditions, that really increases the amount of energy that they're burning. So I'm going to turn it over to Katie for our first poll question.
Thank you, Dr. Cubitt. Our first polling question is, do you think nutrient requirements change in the winter? And the options are not at all, 25%, 50%, 100%, or it depends. Please select your best choice and then click submit. Your specific answer won't be seen by any of the other attendees, but we will go ahead and view the total responses together once we close the poll. Okay, it looks like about 75% of you have voted. If you could just get your last second vote in, we will close the poll in just a few moments. Okay, we're gonna go ahead and close the poll now. And I would like to share the responses with everyone. So, Dr. Cubitt, we have 38% say it depends, 13% say 100%, 50%, or sorry, 21% say 50% of the nutrient requirements change, and 21% also say 25%, and then 8% say not at all.
Okay, well, this is, when we put these poll questions up, there really isn't a right or wrong answer, especially with this question. It all really depends. It depends on the climatic conditions and the horse that we're dealing with as to whether their nutrient requirements change.
Dr. Cubitt, I just wanted to check and make sure that your mic was working correctly. Can everybody hear Dr. Cubitt still?
Yes, I'm here.
Oh, perfect. There you are. Okay, go ahead and start again.
So, Katie, I was saying, perfect, Katie, and saying to people that it's, with this particular poll question, there's really not a right or wrong answer, that in fact, it really does depend on the environmental conditions and on the horse that we're dealing with. So we want to delve into that a little bit further. But before we get into that, I wanted to point out exactly what the horse needs just for maintenance. So, an absolute bare minimum amount of forage per day would be 1% of body weight. And I very rarely feed this little amount of forage. So for a 1,000-pound horse, that'd be 10 pounds of forage. If I have a horse on a weight loss diet, I typically will feed them about 1.2% of their body weight. So that equates to about 12 pounds of forage for that 1,000-pound animal. But I'm generally going to be recommending between 1.5% and 2.5% of body weight. So that's between 15 and 25 pounds of forage that your horse needs to maintain body weight and to maintain proper gut health. So that's our maintenance amount without any extreme environmental conditions. So now let's take a look if we get those really cold temperatures. Now we have this term called the lower critical temperature, or the LCT. And it's the temperature below which metabolic heat production must be increased to maintain body temperature. So we were talking about how the bacteria break down fiber to create heat, how you've got this internal heat production in your horse, and normally under normal conditions, the horse can maintain ideal core body temperature. But if we go below these lower critical temperatures, and they are different depending on the horse we're dealing with, then they are going to utilize more energy to maintain that core body temperature. So let's look at mature horses, so adult horses. The range for this lower critical temperature is between 5 degrees Fahrenheit and 41 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, that is a really wide spread. So if we break it down a little further and talk about horses with thin coats and thick coats, if your horse has a thin coat, it's a thoroughbred or a quarter horse, or you've clipped him and he has a thin coat, then the 41 degrees Fahrenheit is going to be your lower critical temperature. Anything below that, and your horse needs more calories to maintain body temperature. If your horse has a fluffy, thick coat, is a pony, or anyone that develops a thick coat, then they may be closer to that 5 degree Fahrenheit. Anything below that, and they're needing extra calories to maintain body weight. Now, I'll say that an older horse, a senior horse above 20, or a thin horse, these horses also I would put in the upper end of this range, of this lower critical temperature range, around that 41 degrees Fahrenheit. And below that, we're going to have to bump up the energy requirements. When we're looking at young growing horses, the range is a little narrower. It's between 12 degrees Fahrenheit and 32 degrees Fahrenheit. And again, that depends on the breed of the horse you're working with. I always use common sense. The horses that maybe were born in Wyoming and grow up in Wyoming have more tolerance to cold than a horse that has always lived in Texas, for example. So for each degree of coldness, of one decrease in coldness, 1 degree Fahrenheit below that critical temperature, There is an increase in digestible energy requirements for body temperature maintenance, as we mentioned. Now let's look at that a little closer. Okay, so let's use the horse, the older horse, for example, and we're going to use the 41 degrees Fahrenheit as our lower critical temperature. So if the weather outside is 41 degrees Fahrenheit, then there is no difference below that critical temperature. It is 41. Then our maintenance amount, our 1.5% of body weight. Now we are assuming that the forage that we're feeding is of good quality, so it's around 1 megacal per pound. That's a good quality hay. Typically, a local grass hay may run around 0.7, 0.8 megacals per pound, and an alfalfa might run anywhere from 1.1 to 1.2 megacals per pound. So if we're working with a good quality forage, it's around 1 megacal per pound, and we have 41 degrees Fahrenheit, even with that old horse, and we don't have an increase in the amount we have to feed them to maintain body temperature. If we decrease that by 10 degrees, so now we're at 31 degrees Fahrenheit, we've increased our energy requirement per day by 2 megacals. Well, our hay is 1 megacal per pound, so that equates to 2 extra pounds per day. If we go down 20 degrees, so now we're at 21 degrees Fahrenheit, we're up 4 megacals in the day, so we need to feed 4 extra pounds of hay. And you can see as we go down, we're 30 degrees below that 41, so we're at 11 degrees Fahrenheit, or if we're at 1 degree Fahrenheit, you can see our feed intake has significantly increased. What about if it's windy or raining? We all know that it can be sunny outside and 21 degrees and we can still seem to feel warm, but it can be 41 degrees out and windy and cold and raining and it feels like it's 2 degrees out there, and the horses are the same. That wind and the rain really intensify the amount of energy that is lost to maintain body temperature. So let's say we're at 32 degrees Fahrenheit, and we've got 10 to 15 miles per hour wind. That alone is increasing our requirement by 4 to 8 megacals per day, so 4 to 8 pounds per day. If it's 32 degrees Fahrenheit and it's raining and it's windy, we've increased our requirement by 10 to 14 megacals per day, so 10 to 15 pounds a day. So we have a nearly 100% increase in the amount of hay that we would need to feed. So we may be feeding this horse 30 pounds of hay per day, and some horses just physically won't eat that much. So I've got this asterisk here because when we get to this upper limit of hay, so we've got, 10 to 14 megacals we've added because it's rainy and it's windy, but it's 32. So we've also added another 2 pounds because we're 10 degrees below that lower critical temperature. So we're feeding 24 extra pounds of hay per day, or then we may need to start adding more concentrated energy sources, some grain or some fat supplements to boost the amount of calories without adding extra hay. That being said, the hay is always the first place to go. Anytime we're feeding hay to horses, whether it be summer, winter, fall, or spring, our goal is to mimic grazing behavior and extend that meal time, because they're meant to be grazing animals. They're meant to be foraging. They're meant to have a small amount of nutrients constantly trickling through the digestive system. They're constantly utilizing that energy to maintain body temperature and to maintain saliva production and buffer that acid in the stomach. So we really want to make sure that we're either using hay nets or using slow feeders to make sure we're extending that meal feeding time. It takes as little as 6 hours of feed deprivation to cause reddening of the stomach lining, which leads to gastric ulcers. So let's look at what that actually means. How much hay do we actually need to be stockpiling in the wintertime? So I've calculated for most areas of the country, we've got about 5 months where horses are 100% reliant on us for their fiber requirements. Whether you live in a really cold climate and there's a lot of snow and you just need to feed the fiber, or you've got mud season before and after the really cold, and so you don't want to ruin your pastures. We've got about 150 days on average that you have to feed your horses 100% hay. And so at that very conservative amount of 1.5% of body weight, that's 15 pounds of hay per day over that 5 months or 150 days. That works out to just over a ton of hay per day per 5 months. And that's just for one horse. Now, most of our local grass hays are only going to run about 40 pounds per bale, so that's about 60 bales. Well, what if you've got 3 horses? We're looking at over 3 tons of hay and about 90 bales of hay. Well, a lot of people just don't have that much room for storage. And to be honest, this is a very conservative amount of hay, and most people are going to be feeding more than this or want to feed more than this forage to their horses. So let's look at some what I call hay alternatives. We'll see this graph a couple more times, but what I want to point out here is on the bottom of this graph, we've got energy and protein, calcium and phosphorus, copper, zinc, selenium, manganese, iodine, lysine, vitamin A, and vitamin E, all essential nutrients in the horse. And on the vertical axis, we've got this 100% in this red line, and the goal that all these bars would touch that red line, meaning 100% of that nutrient has been met in the diet. You can see for this one that says I, that it's slightly below, about 95%. That's because we recommend a plain white iodized salt to be fed to these horses, and that will supplement that iodine amount. So this horse is not doing any work. He's eating his 1.5% of body weight, his 15 pounds of grass hay, and a pound of ration balancer to supply those vitamins and minerals. And his diet is balanced, but we've worked out that we just don't know if we have 15 pounds a day to feed each of the horses. So the worst thing that people do is just feed what they have. And so, well, I can only feed 10 pounds of hay per day to the horses, or I'm only feeding them 1 flake or 1 biscuit of hay. So what are some alternatives that are much easier to store? And not only that, because they come in a bag, they have a guaranteed analysis and they're available at numerous locations. And actually, if you go on the Standlee Hay website, you can go to their dealer locator and they plug in your zip code and it will give you all of the dealers of their products or the suppliers in your area. And it's really convenient to know that any time of the winter, I can consistently buy the same forage product. So let's look at Timothy pellets, alfalfa pellets or cubes, beet pulp shreds or pellets or soy hulls are all what I call hay alternatives. They're super fibers. They're really highly digestible. I don't usually recommend 100% replacement of your long stem hay, but you can replace about up to 25–50% of your long stem hay. And you can see that the typical analysis on most of these is really quite low in non-structural carbohydrates, so ideal for our sicker sensitive horses. And you can see in this graph, we've replaced 5 pounds of hay with 5 pounds of Timothy pellets, and the diet is still balanced. And again, we feed some iodized salt. So don't be afraid to substitute a small amount of your long stem hay with a forage or hay alternative. Not only can it improve the quality of your forage that you're feeding, but it can also cut back on the amount that you have to store. Let's look at those water requirements because I said this was really important. A maintenance horse will drink between 5 and 15 gallons of water a day. I think this is a really neat analogy, looking at gallon milk jugs so that we can kind of visualize how much they're drinking in a day. A young horse between 4 and 5 gallons per day. If they're exercising, they're still sweating, even though you may not be able to see that sweat because it's very dry. The air is very dry, so that sweat is drying off them very quickly. Anywhere between 15 and 20 gallons of water per day. Pregnancy, 5 to 15 gallons, usually in that upper end because they've got more blood because it's going to that foal. And then a lactating animal, anywhere between 13 to 20 gallons of water because milk is primarily water. So it's really important. Now, if you're using automatic waterers and you don't know whether your horse is drinking plenty of water, then perhaps turn off the automatic waterer and put some water buckets in there for a couple of days just to see if you can monitor that water intake. If you're not quite sure if they're drinking enough water, then there are a couple of tests for dehydration that you can do. You can look at capillary refill time. So you lift up their top lip. I usually use my thumb, and I'll press it on their upper gum, and all of the blood will be pushed out of that area. And the amount of time it takes for that blood to rush back will give us an idea of hydration. So 2 seconds or less for that blood to pop back and to recolor that area, and the horse is going to be hydrated. 3 seconds or more and really be concerned about dehydration. First thing to do would be add some salt to the diet, add some more forage, because feeding forage to the horse actually will work as a reservoir and get them to drink more. You can also do the skin pinch test. I usually do it right above the shoulder, and you pull the skin up and it'll kind of form a little peak, and then you let it snap back. If it takes less than a second and it just pops right back, the horse is hydrated. 2 to 4 seconds or above 4 seconds for that to pop back, and you've probably got a dehydrated horse. So let's touch on that easy versus hard keeper horse. Okay, well, what is that easy keeper? Typically we say it's anywhere from a 7 to a 9, but I've got here pictures of an 8, a 9. We have very profuse fat coverage all over the neck, the hindquarter. And really this is quite dangerous. And I'll just give you a little pointer here. A lot of times my clients will say, I really struggle with trying to get the weight off my horse. I don't have a lot of time to ride him. I feel like I'm already feeding him the very bare minimum that I can feed him without incurring any kind of gastric or digestive problems. So in this case, use the cold weather to your advantage. Let him burn some of those calories to stay warm, and that will really help you get some of that body weight off him. So I'm going to turn it over to Katie for another poll question.
Thank you, Dr. Cubitt. Our second polling question is, what is the most common ingredient you use to put weight on your horse? And the options are oats, beet pulp, rice bran, or other. Please go ahead and select the appropriate response and click submit. Okay, it looks like about 80% of you have voted. I'm going to give you just a few more moments to select your answer. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close the poll now. And what we have, it looks like the most common ingredients used to put weight on horses, 39% have said beet pulp, 32% have said other, 27% have said rice bran, and 2% have said oats. So I will give this back over to Dr. Cubitt.
Excellent. Thank you guys for answering that poll question for us. And really, again, there's no wrong answer. All of those ingredients will put weight back on your horse, but it's just which ones are the most efficient and effective. So let's talk about this thin horse, the hard keeping horse. Let's say we want to put about 40 to 45 pounds of gain on that horse. That's what we consider one body condition score. So let's say we're going from a 4 to a 5 or a 5 to a 6. That's going to take about 40 to 45 pounds of gain. We can safely do that in about 60 days or 2 months. Hence why I said at the beginning of the presentation, we are in the prime time to be thinking about winter and putting weight on our horses now before we get into the really cold weather where the horses are struggling to just maintain their body weight without having to try and gain. So let's look at this table here. And what I've done in this table is on the left-hand side, we've got oats, rice bran, beet pulp, alfalfa hay, or fat and oil, any kind of oil. These are typical ingredients that people use for weight gain. In the middle column, we've got the amount of calories per pound. Remember when we were talking about most of our local grass hays could be around 0.7 to 0.8 megacals per pound. A good alfalfa, about 1.1 to 1.2 megacals per pound, but our good hay was about 1 megacal per pound. So let's just say we're feeding the maintenance amount, we're feeding 1.5% of body weight, 15 pounds of hay. Maybe we're feeding about 5 pounds of grain to the horse. He's not gaining any weight, he's not losing any weight, he's just maintaining. If we're going to use oats as our primary calorie source, based on the amount of energy per pound, we're going to have to feed about 4.5 pounds of oats on top of what we're currently feeding every day for 60 days to get that weight gain. Rice bran has the same calorie content as oats. Now the rice bran, it's going to come less from the sugars and starches and more from fat, but it is still the same calorie content. And so about 4.5 pounds of rice bran a day. If you've seen rice bran compared to oats, 4.5 pounds of rice bran volume-wise is pretty fluffy. Beet pulp, fantastic ingredient, super fiber. We even call it a prebiotic because it really helps those hindgut bacteria. But based on calories, you're going to have to feed about 5 pounds of beet pulp a day. Now that's dry beet pulp, and we prefer that you wet it. And some people, depending, will put double or triple the amount of water in there. So that could work out to be a lot of wet beet pulp. Alfalfa hay, about 6 additional pounds a day. And we're not wetting that alfalfa, so that just works out to be 6 pounds. But really my go-to for quick, safe energy after I've exhausted the amount of hay that I'm feeding is really to add oil to the diet. It's really efficient. The horse doesn't, the amount of heat that's produced by oil is very limited, so we're not getting heat production, but we're not adding a lot of bulk to the diet. It can be very convenient when we're feeding a lot of horses together, and you don't want to have the horse that's got the thin horse that eats really slowly, adding a lot more feed to his diet, and having him eat slower. So one of the other questions that came up quite frequently in our survey when we were asking participants what questions they would like answered in this presentation was, could we touch on blanketing? Now, I will preface this with blanketing horses in the wintertime is a bit like talking about politics. Well, we have people on extreme sides of the fence, so you've got to use a common sense. But what I want to say is look at those horses in that picture. They've got long, furry hair coats, and it's sticking up on end. The way the horse naturally keeps itself warm in the wintertime is with that internal heat, but also that hair coat will puff up, and between the end of the hair coat and the body's skin layer, they create this air pocket, and that air pocket is a very, very efficient insulator and keeps these horses warm. So if I took a blanket and put it on one of these ponies, I would significantly decrease that insulation because I'm flattening down the hair, and there is no blanket that's more effective than that pony's hair coat. So these ponies in the snow, they're doing absolutely fine with no blankets. Where we need to be thinking about blankets is when we're looking at that lower critical temperature. The older horses, we're getting, or horses with a thin hair coat, we're getting below that 41 degrees, or it's cold and windy and rainy. Think about those slides and what made us increase the amount of grain, hay and grain that we might have to feed. They are absolutely the horses that I would be blanketing. Thin horses that don't have that body fat coverage, but again, use that lower critical temperature as your guide, and also just use common sense. But if your horse has got a long hair coat, that hair coat is very, very efficient at keeping them warm. So we ran over a little bit, but let's open it up for questions.
Perfect. Thank you, Dr. Cubitt. We appreciate your great insight into winter feeding and the differences with easy and hard keeper horses. So attendees, please remember to download the nutritional paper and the body condition scoring chart available under handouts before we end the webinar today. And just a reminder, we will be drawing our winner for free product coupons following the Q&A session, so please stick around for that. So let's go ahead and get started on a few questions that were submitted during today's presentation. Again, feel free to still submit questions through the questions pane in your attendee control panel if you'd like. Now, Dr. Cubitt, just to start off, you've talked a lot about forage requirements in today's presentation, but what if someone has a horse with poor teeth and they can't eat hay?
Fantastic question, Katie. The fiber or forage requirements remain the same whether the horse can eat long stem hay or they cannot. So if we went back to that slide that had the minimum amounts of forage a horse needs to eat, 1% as a bare minimum, 1.2% for weight loss, and about 1.5 to 2.5% as ideal. If your horse cannot chew long stem fiber, i.e. hay, they still need to be eating between 15 and 25 pounds of fiber per day. So that's where we're going to utilize our alfalfa pellets, our timothy pellets, our cubes, anything we can wet, make a mash out of. Senior feeds are very high in fiber, but the biggest mistake that people make is when they're feeding a pelleted forage is not feeding enough, especially when that is all the horse needs to eat, all the horse can eat. So remember those percentages. That is how much, no matter whether the horse has teeth or not, the horse needs to eat per day.
Excellent, thank you. And Sarah Beth would like to know, when we're talking about the percent of body weight required daily, are we looking at the ideal body weight for the horse or current body weight? I have some QH mares that tend to always be on a diet and an older Arabian gelding on the thin side, so I have to feed them very differently.
So typically, if I have a horse on a weight gaining program, then I am always looking at ideal body weight. Now, on a weight loss program, I use that let's say our horse is 1,000 pounds, but he really should be 900 pounds. I'll use 1.2% of that 1,000 pounds, 12 pounds of forage, because that really works out to be about 1.5% of his ideal body weight. So weight gain, I use the body weight that we're striving for. But when it's a weight loss program, just because I really don't want to mess with the bacteria in the gut, I will use their current body weight when I'm using that 1.2% of body weight.
Perfect. So Julie would like to know, I live in a northern cold area where winter is long, cold, and bitter wind chills. My horses are mostly easy keepers, and I actually struggle with not letting them get too fat during the winter. Should I keep them at a maintenance level regardless of the impact of the cold, snow, and wind chills?
Yes. If you struggle with weight maintenance and they're just fat because you probably have really good quality forage, but you're not riding them a lot because it's so cold out, then yes, I would just keep them at maintenance, because that's what they need to keep their gut healthy. So if you maintain, let's say they're 1,000 pounds and you're maintaining them between 12 and 15 pounds of hay per day, that will keep their gut healthy, and that will keep them with a maintenance amount. You don't want to go below that, but if it's cold, it's windy and rainy, and our slide said, well, you should bump up the amount. Perhaps don't bump up the amount because you're going to try and use that necessity for them to burn some of those extra calories to try and keep them warm.
Excellent, thank you. And Danielle would like to know, my 2 draft horses are on 4 acres of pasture 24/7 and have hay available always, but they always seem to lose weight in the winter despite their feed of beet pulp, grain, alfalfa, flaxseed, and calf manna. If I add in oil during the coldest months, should I decrease any of the other supplements?
Really, when you're adding the oil, you're just adding pure calories, so you probably wouldn't have to change your other supplements. Now, you could evaluate your other supplements as to whether they're actually working for you. Some of them may be just not working, so you may not need to feed them, but no, you wouldn't have to change them because all you're adding is calories from the oil. It's not like the oil is bringing extra calcium or extra potassium, and you wouldn't want to be overdoing those. So you could keep your diet the same and just add oil. Just always add oil gradually so you don't get yucky diarrhea.
Great, thank you. Kim would like to know, does it matter whether you feed once or twice a day?
This is a fantastic question, and I'll throw it back to the audience and go back to the very first slide. What are horses designed to do? Are they designed to meal feed? I wish we could just do a pop-up poll question. Are they designed to meal feed? Are they designed to eat one meal a day? Are they designed to eat 2 meals a day? Or are they designed to be continually eating? I have another presentation that I've been giving to veterinarians lately, and it is all about feeding management. And when we look at wild horses, they actually have 10 to 15 feeding bouts throughout the day. So that was a very long answer to your very short question. If you're trying to gain weight, the most efficient way to do that is feed them small meals frequently, but also you should feed frequent small meals because that is the way the horse is designed to eat food.
Perfect. Let's see. Claudia would like to know, should I bring my ponies into the barn at night? Can they stay in the pasture with loafing sheds?
It depends. Are they old cushion-oid ponies that are really thin that we're struggling to maintain weight, or are they those little fat easy keepers with a really long hair coat? It's funny, if you leave the barn doors open and you let the horses decide whether they wanted to be in or out, it's usually got to be pretty severe weather before they will choose to be inside. I know in the program I was at as a graduate student, we had brood mares, and we didn't blanket brood mares because they had foals by their side, and it had to be pretty severe weather before they would go into the run-in shed and choose not to be out grazing or standing head to tail. So again, it just depends on the ponies you're dealing with, if they're fat or they're thin, if you feel like you don't want them to waste energy staying warm, or they could stand to waste a bit of energy staying warm.
Excellent.
But typically a loafing shed, if you've got really severe wind, a 2 or 3-sided shed will give them enough shelter.
Okay. Jay would like you to define the dry matter as a measurement of weight.
Dry matter so when we say 1.5% of body weight on a dry matter basis, hay is 90% dry matter. So really, if you were going to do all the math, it would probably work out to be about 16 pounds of hay to give me that 1.5% of actual dry matter. But because hay is pretty much all dry matter, there's no moisture in it, there's no water in it, I usually just pound for pound say you can feed 1.5% of hay. Now, if you're feeding, let's say, a hydroponic forage or one of these bag forages that are fermented forages that have a high water content, some of them, if you look at the water content, can be 50% to 80% water. Right. So if we have to feed our horse 15 pounds of hay per day, dry matter per day, and we're trying to use a one of these fermented forages, it's about 50% water, then for every 5 pounds that you're feeding them, you're actually only giving them 2.5 pounds of dry matter because you're feeding them 2.5 pounds of water. So you have to feed significantly more to get that amount of dry matter. I hope that makes sense.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Cubitt. And we will just do one more question before we wrap everything up. But Dawn would like to know, I'm currently soaking a large amount of forage pellets for a senior horse. Wondering the best way to do this in a winter climate.
Yeah, that can be a real struggle if you don't have hot water, or that you put them out and they freeze because it's so cold. Really the trick with that is you can put a little salt in there, but also because the salt water doesn't freeze as quickly, but you don't want to put too much salt that we're kind of forcing them to drink excessively. But putting small buckets out continually throughout the day, and I know most of us work, so it's not like we can be out there every 15 minutes putting out another another bucket, but it's definitely a challenge. There's really no easy answer to it's really cold and the buckets freeze, but maybe you have to bring hot water from, if there's no hot water at your barn, you've got to bring hot water, or adding some beet pulp in there that can help soak up some of that water.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Dr. Cubitt. And thank you everyone for attending today's webinar. We really appreciate your time and interest in wanting to learn more about nutrition for your animals. So before we wrap up, we'll go ahead and announce our winner of free product coupons now. And the winner is Stephanie Williams. So congratulations. We will email you to get mailing information to send out your coupons. So I know we didn't have time to get through all of the questions that were submitted today, but feel free to reach out to Standlee's customer relations team. The phone number and email are available on this final slide. You can find past webinars, more nutritional white papers, and other great information, including the Standlee Barn Bulletin blog and some great tools to help identify what type of forage is best for your horse and how to optimize their diet on our website at standleeforage.com. When you leave today's webinar, you will receive a survey on the presentation, and it would be very appreciated if you would complete that for us. Your feedback will really help us to create better webinars for you and help us identify some great topics for future webinars. You will also receive a follow-up email within about 24 to 48 hours with a link to view a recording of today's webinar if you'd like to go back and reference it. The recording should be available for about a week following today's webinar and then available on our website under nutritional resources. And the PDF of this presentation will also be available on our website if you would like to download that. So on behalf of Standlee Premium Western Forage and Dr. Cubitt, thank you so much for joining us for this webinar, and we hope you have a great rest of your week.